So the euro, I think, is the one that gets hit the most during this event risk period. But these event risks have certain characteristics. We often assume in our risk management that you don't have price gaps. You might have noticed we had some really big ones last night. We had a big one in the pound on October 7th. We had a big one in the pound on June 24th, the day after Brexit. We are having more frequently, you have a big price gap. If you trade options and you know about the Black-Scholes options model, the Black-Scholes options model assumes price gaps never occur. Pretty tricky. Another thing we typically assume is stable volatility regimes. No. When you're dealing with event risks, the volatility regime is going to change. Black-Scholes assumes that the volatility regime never changes. So you've got Vega risk out the... By the way, Vega is not a Greek letter, even though it's part of the Greeks. Stable correlation structure. You know, you had one correlation structure last night between about 9 p.m. and midnight. So the equities were going down, the peso was going down, gold was going up, and then you had another correlation structure from midnight to now where the equities rebounded and the peso didn't, and you did have gold holding its correlation. But you had a very different correlation structure. And I think you'll have different correlation structures going forward. So if you're assuming stable correlations inside your risk models, you probably are taking way more risk than your model suggests. We often assume normal or log normal distributions. Event risk tells you right away that you have something we call a bimodal distribution. If Trump wins, it looks like this. If Clinton wins, it looks like this. If they vote to leave in the UK, it looks like this. If they vote to stay, it looks like this. So you have a double camelback type of distribution. It's decidedly not normal. And then the day after the event, it converges back to some single peak thing. So your probability distributions are not stable, and they're not what typical risk models assume. So I don't know if any of you are in the risk management business, but you've got lots of issues coming up because of more frequent event risk. We also assume that a lot of things are linear. Just easier to assume that. Okay, nothing's linear in these markets, so that's another bad assumption. So the risk management side of things is going to be way more difficult. We do feel like options are a great way to manage that risk. But you simply have to be aware that some of the assumptions in the basic options model are going to be violated. So if you're expecting a price gap, the option's more valuable. If you're expecting a shift in volatility upward, the option's more valuable. There are plenty of models available that can do these calculations. They're just a lot more complicated. But if you're like me, I grew up with a Bloomberg machine and I just hit the button and look at implied vol. That's just not going to be the right number. It's going to be typically too low for this kind of an environment. Another thing that happens with this kind of event risk environment is you have calm before the storm. So you don't have much volatility, then you get the event, and then you react to it. And markets react. So historical volatility will be an exceptionally bad predictor of future volatility while we're in these kind of situations. And we're going to have a lot of these situations in the U.S. coming out of this election because over the next, between now and January 20th, we're going to have all these people vetted for cabinet positions, and some of them are going to have pretty strong views. And so when you hear their views, you're going to get scared about something or you're going to be happy about something, but it's going to move sectors around. So that's a particularly interesting issue to watch out for, is way more event risk coming from those kind of decisions. And then once the cabinet's in place, you're going to have, and the Congress is in place, we're going to find out who's chairing the committees. And the committee chairmen are going to be very important for setting the agendas. So if you're worried about, you know, what's going to happen to the ethanol rules, you've got to figure out who's chairing the Senate Ag Committee, things like that. These things can all move around on us. So we have plenty of time and possibility of events that could destabilize markets. So, and we're just going to be learning about that over the next 6 or 8 weeks as to who's going to be running this show. And then we'll figure out what they want to do. And then we'll start to figure out which sectors are favored and which ones aren't and so forth. So a lot of volatility in the equity sectors, a lot of volatility in equity itself.